What's up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Student Teacher Vlogs. You probably noticed that as with the previous video there has been a 2-week gap in between the last video and this one coming out. There are a few reasons for that which will hopefully become evident as the video goes on. So what I would like to do is just crack on with it and I will explain as we go along. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to talk about updates wise is what's going on with my placement and what's going to happen with that going forward. Still not officially in a placement yet. There's a lot of behind the scenes things that are going on at the moment which are making it very unclear as to what's actually happening, whether or not I am going to indeed be doing my placement where I thought I was going to. I must admit I am getting to the point now where I'm eager to get into a classroom environment or to at least do something so I can start applying the things that I've been learning. As I imagine most of the people on my course are, but the situation is as it is. Obviously we're in a pandemic at the moment, it's making things difficult for everyone, particularly taking on additional support which now requires more paperwork than it ever would have done before. You'd have needed to do things like DBS checks and health and safety charts and all that kind of thing, but now you also have to account for having additional people in the classroom and making sure that they're adhering to all of the policies around the pandemic and social distancing and so on and so forth. So it does add another barrier, which is one of the main things that's making it more difficult for this to go ahead, which is fair enough, still frustrating though. So as regards to what's been going on over the past couple of weeks in terms of learning and what we've actually developed. So the learning is still being done via Teams and conference calls because there's no other practical way to do it otherwise. However, we have made a little bit of headway in terms of actually getting into a classroom environment. As it currently stands, and I say as it currently stands because it changes all the time, we are set to be having at least one session every 2 weeks actually at the university itself. First one of those for me will be next week. I'll actually get to meet the vast majority of people on my course for the first time in person. Obviously I feel like I know them relatively well already because of the amount of online sessions and extra stuff we've been doing outside of that, but still it'll be nice to see everyone in person and also to see the kind of difference being in person makes to our overall learning experience there. So what have we actually been learning? We've been starting to look at assessment. So assessment in of itself is how, what methods and practices do you put in place to check that your students are actually learning, and off the back of that, how do you use that to inform how you would teach them going forward. So we were instructed to watch a couple of videos from a programme which I believe was on the BBC a few years ago, called the Classroom Experiment. It's the main kind of figure in this is a man by the name of Dylan William. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what his qualifications and everything are. They are covered in the Classroom Experiment itself, but for anyone wanting an insight into different and what I suppose we could call non-traditional methods of assessment and trying new things in a classroom, the 2 videos are on YouTube. So just type in Dylan William Classroom Experiment. You'll get both episodes come up, and I would really recommend giving those a watch, particularly if you like watching programmes like Educating Greater Manchester and Educating Yorkshire and that kind of thing. It's in a similar vein, but with someone from outside of the organisation coming in and applying these changes, as opposed to us just observing the changes that are being made by the organisation themselves off of their own backs there. We have also started to look at the way that these assessment methods affect students and learners. We're also given a video to watch of a TED talk from 2015, talking about how primarily in the US the standardized test system, like how it affects students, teachers, schools themselves, so on and so forth. Obviously, standardized tests are not just used in the US, but it's an interesting insight into what the education system is like over there. So, to describe it briefly, if you understand the basics of capitalism, it's very similar in principle to that, in this idea that there has to be constant improvement. It's not enough to like keep everything on an even level, even if that level is already good. You have to keep on constantly improving. So we're seeing in those situations things like, if there isn't that constant improvement or the perceived constant improvement, that schools are having funding removed, and as a result people are losing jobs, schools themselves are having to close down. In some instances you can argue that this is because they're not doing what they need to do, but looking at it from a perspective of what they're being asked to do, it then becomes a question of, are the students actually learning something, or are they just being taught how to pass a test to keep everyone's scores up? And that's where kind of like the moral and ethical dilemma comes in, because ultimately you know that if they don't do things this way, then the school gets its funding removed, the kids are worse off. But also, from the other side of that, teachers are very often not able to teach in the way that they would want to. They have to teach answers as opposed to teaching the method to get to the answer, which in an ideal world is what should be happening. It shouldn't necessarily be enough to simply know the answer to a question. You need to understand how to get to that question, get to that answer rather. The funny thing was, when I was younger, I always used to resent on like maths papers and things like that, having to show all of my working out. A lot of it I tended to do in my head rather than written down. Not all of it, obviously, but it used to frustrate me that I had to prove that I'd somehow gotten the answer right. But it's one of those things that, with hindsight, I understand why that is. If you can't prove how you got an answer right, then there's no indication that if given a similar question on the same thing with a different answer, that you're necessarily going to get to that answer. So I appreciate that a lot more now that I'm older. Interesting to hear that companies like Google, for instance, take little to no notice of what people's standardized test scores are, purely and simply because they don't see them as an indication of whether or not that student is actually suitable for whatever role, whatever job they're going for within the company. They instead assess their ability to learn and to improve. And from what I can gather, a lot of employers are taking that stance now of, well, being able to tick a few boxes doesn't tell me whether or not you're going to be good at your job. Things like actual practical experience and a willingness to learn are more important than if you were able to memorise a set of answers and tick the right boxes. which you can certainly see. You can certainly see why they're starting to come around to that way of thinking. If you think of the number of people who may not necessarily be good at exams but excel in all other areas, like I've never been particularly good at exams myself. I've always been better at things like presentation work or coursework, where I have like more time to do it, more time to get my thoughts together around what needs to be done. So, and that's the same for a lot of people. There are people who do actually thrive in an exam environment, but for a lot of people it's the other way around. And if this person then loses out because they're not particularly good at exams, but they have everything else needed for that job role, then not only does that person lose out, but potentially the employer loses out as well on someone who's going to do a better job overall. It's not to say someone who got a better test score isn't going to do a good job, but it's looking at the what ifs and the potential of what could happen. So a very complex topic. It did lead us into thinking about all of the different types of assessment there are, and all the different kind of things that we can do. An assessment doesn't need to be like, oh, answer these questions and then we'll see what you know. It can be stuff like putting them in a group and getting them to put a presentation or a poster together, doing a pop quiz at the end, basically just doing anything where they would have to apply that learning to a situation, and that acts as your proof that they know what's happening, but it's also a catalyst for you finding out what areas that are lacking on, what you need to improve on when you're teaching the subject, and where to go from there. So, along with building familiarity with different forms of assessment, in particular formative assessment, we have been given some details as regards to the different assignments that we have coming up. A lot of them are looking at the impact of formative assessment itself, and looking into not only what Dylan William has proposed, but also what other people are doing, what other people have said, the experiences that other people have had. So that could be in anything from books, journal articles, videos, so on and so forth. Off the back of this, we'll also be looking at doing an annotated bibliography. This differs from a standard bibliography where it's just a list of references. It's almost an analytical bibliography. So looking at an individual source, picking out the key points of it, and then doing a more in-depth analysis of those individual points, what they mean for my practice as a teacher, and yeah, just looking into it in a bit more depth like that. So as part of that, we will be needing to include a specification for whichever subject that we're teaching. So the specification itself will come from any of the exam boards in the UK. So things like AQA, EdExcel, Pearson's, so on and so forth. For me, I've still got a choice to make with that. Officially, my choice going ahead is to stick with AQA for their A-level media studies. So very much a theory-based course. But what I've also been looking into is with Pearson's the BTEC in creative media production. So that's very much a practical course as opposed to a theory-based course. Obviously, there's aspects of each of them, but I've still got a decision to make with that as regards to what I really want to do going forward. And the assignments are continuing, coming in thick and fast. It's unsurprising given that we only have a year to cover all this ground, but starting into January of next year, once we've got those particular assignments in, we then switch focus and move on to something being coined joint practice development, otherwise known as action research. So it's effectively what our course is kind of building towards, is getting a groundwork, or a foundation, if you like, of the kind of theory and like best practices that we should know about, and then taking what we've learned, developing it into something else based on a specific question that it's up to us as to what that is, and then reporting that back. So it differs from standard scientific research in that you're not necessarily looking for participants. It's not a case of like going out and doing surveys and getting people to sign consent forms, all that kind of thing. It's almost entirely a reflection on what you've done. So in theory, you come up with a way to address the question that you've asked. Try that in a classroom environment, reflect on what went well and what didn't, and then that is kind of collated with a partner who might not necessarily be doing even the same topic, probably won't be working in the same space as you, but will be trying to apply the same overall theories and practices, so that instead of just getting one person's perspective, you have two people trying the same thing two different ways. You get a much more accurate idea of whether something's working or not, but it also means you can share best practice between the two of you. So all of that is going to culminate in us doing individual reports on exactly what happened, what went wrong, what went well, what we did about that, and then we'll also include a critical analysis of the literature that supports what it was that we were doing, as well as anything that maybe our own research has actually counteracted. It could very well be that the literature says that this should happen when actually something else happened, and if it happened for the both of us, it actually makes it a little more interesting, because I think that coming up with something that that doesn't support existing information is it's not that it's more important than just agreeing with something, but it's more of a contribution to the overall profession if you can say that, okay, well, this didn't work for me, but this is how I dealt with that. This is a different way. Because obviously, if every bit of research you did just agreed with the stuff that was already there, what was the point of doing it? Other than just confirming that something that has already been tested to death works. So for me, I have an idea of what I want to do with that, and what I want to focus on. And for me, that's going to be looking around how existing technologies that students have access to and use on a daily basis can be used in a classroom environment. It's always interested me, taking this idea of what a student might do as a hobby or something they do outside of school that would normally bear no relevance, but utilising that in a way that not only makes it easier for them to learn, but also increases their engagement levels. It might be that it doesn't necessarily make it any easier to teach, but if the student's more engaged, they're more likely to try harder, or to ask more questions, and will effectively be a lot more useful as, for want of a better term, test subjects. So what that would actually look like would be looking at things like social media, so your Snapchats, Instagrams, Facebook, Twitter, all that kind of thing, and seeing how you can utilise those. Now, the issue that you have with that in most cases is that a lot of institutes have their own rules as regards to social media, and they'll have their own team that conducts everything official to do with social media for that institute itself. So whilst setting up something like an Instagram account for classwork to go onto sounds simple enough, it's actually it's a much more complex ask than you would think it would be, particularly if you're going to be uploading things like that to what is essentially a public forum that anyone can access. So you have to then look around the ethics and the safeguarding concerns of that. So that in of itself, it is going to be a whole different side project, is looking at the viability of it, and then later looking at, is this actually having a positive effect? I would like to think that being able to utilise something that you are already familiar with, that you're comfortable with, and that you use on a daily basis, makes it far easier for you to engage with something than if you're going in completely cold, than if you're walking into a classroom, handed a pen and paper, and being told to just write notes. So, as an example, off the top of my head, if I know, for instance, that for some students, they benefit from being able to record what's happening in the lesson, normally via some sort of audio recording device. So that leads me to wonder whether, if as a collective the class had access to that, and rather than getting them to write notes as they went along, we then got them to listen back to what had been said, to pick out the key points. Not only are you familiarising them with technology that they might not use, but it'll be stuff that they also can use. So they'll probably have recorded something on their phone before. It's just kind of developing that. So that's developing your ICT skills. But it also helps assess where their ability to analyse is at. Are they able to pick out the important points of what's being said? Are they just writing down word for word everything that's happened, or are they interpreting that information themselves? So something like that, I think, could be really, really interesting, but it's looking at the practical side of it and whether it actually does increase student engagement. It's going to be the main crux of what I would want to look into. Now, it might be that that my vision for that changes based on pairing up with someone else and discussing through it. I've always been better at developing other people's ideas as opposed to coming up with my own. It's not to say that it's entirely impossible, but if I can see the value in someone's idea, I feel that I'm pretty good at like kind of running with it and developing it and asking questions that will like improve on it overall. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into that. Don't know whether I'm as much looking forward to writing a big report about it, but it's stuff that's going to be done along the way anyway, so it's not going to be like getting to the end of it and being lumbered with a 2,000 word report that's like due in a week or something like that. But obviously all of that is dependent on me actually getting into a classroom, so that's something to definitely look forward to. Okay, so with all that being said, that leads us to the end of this particular video. You may have noticed it's a fair bit longer, and I've tried a few more things as regards to how it is edited, how it is presented. Part of the reason that I've left a week in between doing this and or left an additional week rather, in between doing this and doing the previous video, is so that it would give me the opportunity to kind of have a bit of a cool down and a bit of a think more about how I wanted to present these videos going forward. There will still very much be pieces done to camera, They're not scripted, as you can tell. I just write a few notes down of the things that I want to talk about and then go from there. But what I want to do going forward is to make these videos a bit more effective, and also a little more visually appealing if I can. So that being the case, I will be looking to do one of these videos every 2 weeks as opposed to every week, as I feel it makes it a lot more achievable for me to be able to present something to you all that's not only has the same content in as we had before, but is also a little more visually appealing, and for want of a better term, a little easier to watch. This isn't based on feedback that I've gotten from people, but more based on how I was feeling coming back to the videos after having that week off. You may have noticed my previous video was incredibly short, and I think it was just me getting burnt out with the creative process behind them. So we're doing something a little bit different with these going forward. Hopefully you enjoy it. If you do, please do leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below. As always, if you have any particular questions for me, anything that you would like me to go over in more detail, please do ask. I'm yet to have one of those questions, so I'm waiting for the day when I do, and I don't know whether I will be excited or terrified if that happens. If you could also head over to the channel and click the subscribe button if you would like to receive notifications when these videos go live. Then if you click the bell icon as well, not only then will you get notified when these videos go live, but also when any of the other content I produce does. And you know, it's a nice little indication for me that the improvements, which I'm going to tentatively call them, that I'm going to be making to these videos have been well received, and that it's the way that I should do these going forward. So on to the edit to see whether in theory the theory is as good as the actual practice. And as always, look after yourselves, and I'll see you again soon.